On behalf of the Accountability Initiative at the Center for Policy Research and Microsafe Consulting, it's a pleasure to welcome both our speakers as well as the participants to a short discussion we are having on decoding India's public finance management system. To introduce myself, my name is Avni and I lead the Accountability Initiative at CPR.
So welcome everyone. It's great to have all of you here. As Avni was mentioning, just to quickly set some context, I think the idea was to use the upcoming budget as a platform and as a time to really start talking about how to kind of have more efficient fund flows and efficient systems in place. Over the past years, a lot of attempts actually have been made to develop a public finance management system that tracks funds through the budget cycle. And one example is the Union government's PFMS, right? And it has sought to streamline the tracking and accountability of funds. So there is a lot that has been done, and yet today we can sit and probably start with one basic question, right? Like, how can the government spend their money more effectively to deliver these public services? And so I think one of the starting points of this discussion could be just talking about what makes a PFMS system more robust, and the process is more robust. So this will probably be more of a focus right now for us in a very short time, how to make fund flow practices stronger and how to build more robust data management systems. With that, I would actually pass off the mic to Mr. Rath, who will probably start off with some initial remarks, and then Dr. Bono, if you could talk about what has your experience been like in terms of challenges. Avni, I think, has joined. So Avni, would you want to just quickly add to this if there was yeah.
I don't know what happened. Suddenly my internet has started acting up. I will not take anyone's time. I think it will be, since we're already in 8 minutes, but apologies for the technical glitch. But looking forward to hearing opening remarks. And I've logged on now from my phone, so hopefully we won't have the same glitch. And I look forward to asking some difficult questions as well as we move on to the second part of the session.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Dr. Bonu. Good afternoon, others. So this is, I think, this is a good initiative to have a kind of consultation on two very important aspects of PFM practices: fund management and best way to direct the fund, and then data quality and data observability. These are two of the very important aspects of PFM system management and PFM practices across the states and also at the national level. So to give my initial remarks, I would actually briefly start with a broad background on budget formulation and its execution process. Actually, in case of maybe national government and as well as at the subnational level, because I have primarily experience in subnational budget making and PFM practices. So the budget cycle starts with a kind of budget formulation circular issued by the finance department or Ministry of Finance, which actually invites budget suggestion from different stakeholders, and within a time frame it is collected, and then kind of pre-budget consultation process takes place, and then the budget is finalized. And most important aspect of budget formulation is basically the resource envelope and budget prioritization, which are very important, and that is the key in PFM practices. So to actually look into other aspects, I would actually like to briefly draw the attention of the audience on 2 years of PFM practice which we are encountering. One is 2021 and another is 21-22. 2021 was primarily a year which was actually ravaged by the pandemic, and there was a huge resource crunch, and managing the PFM was a difficult task at the hand of national government as well as state government, because the government was required to spend heavily on account of pandemic management, then some social security measures which was required to be taken up, and healthcare and all those things. So the pressure on the resources was quite high, and the resource availability was quite low. In contrary, actually in 21-22, again the year was affected by pandemic, but there was a peculiar situation which I found when I looked at the data. If we look at the quarter 2 end of 21-22, there is a cash balance equivalent to 4.7 trillion among the all states, and which is equivalent to 2% of GDP. And what is the primary reason of that? This year, the resources have increased substantially, but the expenditure is not picking up. There are different dimensions why the expenditure is not picking up, and it is expected that most of the states may actually end up with a huge surplus at the year end. So that is a peculiar situation which we are encountering this year, and the expenditure level is not expected to reach, in fact, the pre-pandemic level if we compare it to the percentage of GDP. That is a peculiar thing which may be a point of debate. And there comes the issue of budget credibility and budget utilization. Over the years, the budget credibility has been an issue. Which budget we call a very credible budget? When your estimate actually goes very close to your expenditure or budget utilization. So that is a question where the states as well as the national government has to work a lot. Then liquidity and fund management is a area where especially the state governments, sub-national governments have to work. Peculiar situation with Odisha this year is that we are actually having with a flush of funds because of a substantial increase in mining revenue by the state. So how much is the quantum of liquidity we should manage, and the way it has to be directed and spent. There are few areas where we also are working with MSC through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. One is the area of just-in-time payment. That is an experiment we are doing. We are almost in a pilot stage. A series of discussions have been made with the different stakeholders, and we have actually come up with a few solutions where there will be no cash float in the system. When as and when it is required, it will be paid, and it will be a kind of rule-based payment. So that will reduce the cash float at different levels. Number two, we have to actually look beyond the present system, and maybe a treasury single account format can be thought through, and it is not a immediate solution. It may take a lot of time to reach that, but we have to move towards that, and that is one area everybody may have to work. In case of my state Odisha, we have gone for a mechanism of SBMS, where we have been able to actually put in place a system in our IFMS to track all the bank accounts, like it is done in PFMS system. And commitment management is another area of liquidity and fund management, which we have started with the support of IMF. And first step is commitment recording, then commitment management, and then commitment control, which if it is fully implemented, it can reduce a lot of fund kind of floats at different level. And so far as this budget credibility, we have in our state put in place few advanced PFM practices with the support of International Monetary Fund. One is we have put in place a medium-term fiscal framework, which is a comprehensive format where we have been doing a kind of regular projection of our resources as well as expenditure in medium term. Then we from last 2 years we have been coming up with a pre-budget disclosure in the form of fiscal strategy report, which we feel as one of the best practices we are adopting. And one of the most important aspect we have put in place is a top-down strategic budget making process, which we introduced while preparing our budget in 2021. This is a practice where the medium-term resource projection is made, and department-wise ceiling is communicated well in advance. The departments are given adequate flexibility to prioritize their expenditure. So through this, I think in coming few years, the budget credibility and fund utilization will substantially improve. Then the PFMS, which has been a kind of system that is developed by Government of India to track the end use of scheme funds, is one of the good initiatives. But it has to actually look beyond what it is right now looking at. So there is a dichotomy between the single nodal account format and the TSA, which should be preferred. That is one area we can actually debate upon. Rather, this integrated financial management system at the state level actually looks into a life cycle approach where all aspects of the financial management are actually handled through one system. So the data integrity, data flow, and data quality across all the systems is uniform. It actually looks into a single source of truth. And more importantly, another aspect we have to look into is data dissemination policy at different levels. So these are a few of the areas where I would actually I have initial remarks on this. Maybe we can debate upon all these things in course of this seminar. So right now I'll stop, and maybe I would love to actually respond to queries.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dutt. I think just to, since our audience may not be completely aware of all the terminologies, just to, I guess, summarize a little bit of what you had mentioned, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I think one of the areas that you had said, so we know that the current fund flow system in India is often designed as a push system, where money is transferred down a hierarchical chain. Right from Government of India down to the local level based on forecasts that are available. You've spoken about the just-in-time system, because in some ways what ends up happening in such a system is money is transferred to the next mile without necessarily having a clear understanding of the amount of utilization that the capacity to spend in some ways. And that has a weird problem where on one hand there's a huge opportunity cost because money is going and lying in bank accounts that is not being spent. But at the same time, for the union government or for any other, for even the state governments, when it comes to local bodies, you have this problem where you yourself don't have liquidity, right? So, so you had spoken about a just-in-time system, for example, which will be more of a pull system where you're not having too much money that is lying unspent in bank accounts. I think you'd also spoken about the fact that you do have the PFMS system, which is one of the systems that was started by the union government. But there are challenges with that as well. And so it's important to think through some of that, particularly whether you should have a single treasury account or the single nodal account or the treasury single account. The other thing that I think that came up a little bit from your opening remarks was that I think one of the biggest challenges also that we've also seen is that in any implementation, there's a need to have checks and balances and controls, but that often means that you have lots of layers and additional approval process. So in fact, we had done a study where we found for the State Health Society, just at the state level for National Health Mission, it had to go through 25 desks at the state level. So you spoke a little bit about department-wise ceiling, which would mean that within that ceiling, you don't have to constantly take more approvals, and you can try and get money. Money can flow faster in the system. And of course, you spoke a little bit about budget credibility and creating. What we often lack is a medium-term fiscal framework. And so actually thinking through some of that would possibly help the budget credibility. Anything that I missed, I just wanted to summarize, since our audience is a mixed audience and not everyone understands, may not understand the terminologies, which I myself often struggle with as well. Great. So maybe we can turn to Dr. Bonu now. One of the things that I had wanted to start off with saying as well is that today's discussion, so while it is called Public Finance Management System, we do want to look at the technology side of it, but not just. I think often PFM is conflated just with the PFMS system. But actually, it's more about the principles of things, right from when budgets are prepared, their credibility, and as Dr. Rath also spoke about, to the execution as well, from the fund flows and budget evaluation. And of course, we know that this is not, the fund flow part is just one part of the story. So we'd love to hear from you, Dr. Bonu, on your opening remarks on, especially given that we're right upon, budget season is right upon us right now.
Thanks, Savani. Thanks, Mr. Rath. Public finance management system, I think, encompasses a lot more than what PFMS in Indian context does. It involves the full cycle of budget formulation, where Mr. Rath was talking about prioritization of investments in a budget constrained environment, and then its execution, and also monitoring the execution and learning lessons. So my office, which is the Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, is committed at the core to achieving the outcomes. So we do a lot of outcomes monitoring, and also our evaluations are also linked to outcomes, and we look at the design of the programs and also their implementation too. So in that context, I want to emphasize that PFMS is an input system of input tracking. It is important, but it is not adequate as long as it doesn't link very well with the achievement of outcomes. And ultimately, the objective of the whole budget exercise is to achieve national development priorities, or SDGs, in the most effective manner, with the in a sustainable manner. So I think that bigger picture should also always be kept in mind. We might have perfect budget systems where money is perfectly transferred as salaries to teachers, and yet if the teaching learning in the classroom doesn't take place well, and if it results in serious learning outcome failure, what are we doing? So while it's important, it's not complete. So that's very important point I want to mention. And we have made tremendous progress, but I think the critical part at a higher level, I think, is defining the key outcomes that we want to achieve and tracking those outcomes on a regular basis, if required through regular survey, and then linking them with the budget allocation process, and figuring out through iterative process how effectively and efficiently we can achieve those outcomes with efficient budget allocations. And the government has multiple tools to achieve its outcomes. Budget or investments is one part of it. It also regulates private sector. It also has laws, rules, regulations, and it also through information can achieve the objective. So I think it has multiple tools. Investment is only a single but very important tool. But ultimately, all of them have to lead to achievement of desired outcomes. I think that bigger picture, I think we need to remember. So in that context, I think PFMS, in the limited context of tracking centrally sponsored scheme allocations from the point of allocations up to it reaching the end beneficiary. It started off in 2009 and expanded its scope in 2013 and has made significant progress. It's well established in 28 states and union territories. It has lakhs of interface with implementing agencies. It has interface with core banking systems of over 300 banks. It has interface with the National Payment Corporation of India, and it has become the backbone of direct benefit transfers. And just in 2021 and 22, it has achieved 116 crore number of transactions worth 27 lakh crores. It has a four-tier structure, but I think a lot more work has to be done at district project management unit in the states. The target was to establish around 400 district project management units, and a lot of progress has to be made. I think it's a journey, it's progressing, it's extremely complex in a federal system. But to achieve more effectiveness, I think a lot more work has to be done. One of the important areas where a lot more work needs to be done is the low usage of expenditure, advance, and transfer module by the implementing agencies under the central sector and centrally sponsored schemes, which is resulting in some challenges in full rollout of PFMS. So when wherever there is a EAT module of the implementing agencies, they provide utilization certificate quarterly, but they don't provide the balances that are there with the implementing agency. Likewise, currently, when you aggregate PFMS data at the national level, it's largely analytically, it helps you to track large budget allocations. Recently, we were trying to see if we could track the use of funds at each of the large infrastructure projects, because we wanted to check how the S-curve was on the implementing. We wanted to look at how the funds were being utilized in terms of contract awards and disbursements. We realized that the type of tracking doesn't exist. So that means once you have this whole end-to-end digitized PFMS system, we also need a lot more variables to be put into the system so that it provides the type of deep data insights. Just to give an example, like an infrastructure project is supposed to be completed in 5 years. That means we expect a disbursement of 20% every year over a 5-year period. But initially it is slow. It's like a S-curve. For us, we have close to 500, around 1,300 large infrastructure projects over 150 crore across the country, funded by Government of India. So we need to figure out on a real-time basis how these projects are performing, and expenditure could be one of the ways. And if the money is flowing through PFMS should be able to provide us with the type of deeper insights to monitor this program. So I'm just highlighting as a one place where the existing backbone can be further augmented to do better monitoring. Basically, coming back to the PFMS, I've already mentioned the EAT module has to be adopted by all the implementing agencies. And PFMS is a complex system, so a lot more capacity building and training are required. And for unspent money to be properly reflected, the implementing agencies quarterly have to provide the unspent money along with the utilization certificates. there are a few other areas where one can strengthen, but what we have done now I'll move to what Development Monitoring Evaluation Office Niti Aayog is doing to achieve the government objectives of outcomes in the most efficient manner. One clear area that we have identified is that the internal application of internal IT systems for tracking of the various schemes is of varied level in different ministries. And as a part of it, DMU, my colleagues have come up with a index called Data Governance Quality Index, where the depth of digitization of various scheme implementation has been tracked, and also how this data, once it comes back, how the quality is assured, and what type of analyticals are done. So as a part of this exercise, we also looked at how PFMS was being rolled out. It gave us insights into how PFMS is currently rolled out. Out of 540 central sector and centrally sponsored schemes that, for which we did a survey, we realized that around 140 of the schemes had MIS systems linked to PFMS, which comes to around 25%. So there's a long way to go. And among this 140 schemes, only around 94 schemes have completed end-to-end integration up to the last mile. So that means there is still a lot to be done to onboard all the implementing agencies. And once they are brought on board, it's also important to take it end to end. So there are lots of there's a lot of need for deepening the PFMS system. Even we found that in beneficiary-oriented schemes, there is still need for at least around 28% of the schemes still need linkage with Aadhaar, 18% with mobiles, and 22% with bank account. And the good thing is now Data Governance Quality Index is mainstreamed, and all the ministries and departments are expected to achieve DGQI score of 5.0 by December 2022, for which all the ministries departments have set up an action plan, and also a data and strategy unit. And PFMS is an important part of DGQI. So that's where we see. Before I end, I also want to touch upon a few other things that we are doing. Along with the budget document, there is also an outcomes budget document that is presented to the Parliament for schemes above 500 crores. This document is prepared by Development Monitoring Evaluation Office in close consultation with various ministries and departments and Department of Expenditure. Here, for various scheme outlays, the outputs and outcomes are described, and the annual targets are also stated. Once the budget is presented, the schemes less than 500 crores are presented along with the detailed demand of grants of the ministry and departments themselves. For 500 crores and above, it's presented along with the main budget. There's a dashboard maintained by DMU, in which these outputs and outcomes are tracked throughout the year. And at the end of the year, the previous year's outputs and outcomes achievement is reviewed at Honorable Vice Chairman Niti Aayog and member level. So clearly, there is inbuilt system to review the outcomes. Definitely, the data architectures to measure outcomes are not that strong. There's a lag in the time between measurement and actual reporting. So as a country, I think we really need to invest on measuring outcomes in a much more robust and regular and timely manner. Many of these outcomes are at the household level, for which administrative data is not adequate. So we really need to have these survey-based outcomes. I think the next part is how do we achieve these outcomes in the most efficient and effective manner in a budget constrained environment. And this is where I think the role of government as a financier and a provider or a financier, where services are contracted out to private sector, or where markets can respond, how can you take it through proper regulation. So these are much larger challenges, but I think having very detailed understanding about the outcomes that we want to achieve and how effectively we are achieving, and then linking them with public finances and trying to figure out what would be the best ways to achieve them through appropriate budget allocations, and for which I think we need very good data systems. I think there is definitely need to improve administrative data, which I think data governance quality index and things like that are doing, and PFMS would also support. But it's also very important to strengthen our outcomes data architecture. This is probably where I'll stop, and I'll respond to questions later on. Back to you, Avani.
Thank you, sir. You answered my question already, which was going to be that when you spoke about outcomes, that's always a sticky point, just because as a country, our outcomes data is not as strong. And as you said, there is often a lag. So one of the biggest questions is, how do you link expenditure to outcomes? And that's a question we also get asked, the bang for buck, return on investment kind of questions. And that's often a struggle, because I think one of the things that we found also is that there are so many other factors that are often at play. It's not just the fund flow side of it, as you also said. It's not just data, though data being an important factor. There are, of course, other challenges as well. So I do have a couple of questions for you, I think, including some that are coming from the audience. But maybe I'll just quickly move over to Mr. Rath and come back to you. Mr. Rath, I think Dr. Bonu also spoke about this, which is in a federal country, finances always becomes tricky. And I remember many years ago when we were trying to study the PFMS system, and here I'm talking about the specific technological system, not the way that we're defining public finance management more as a process cycle. There was this tension between the union and states to some degree. Part of it was that PFMS is only for centrally sponsored schemes. And so it didn't always integrate well with states' own treasuries. And then there was, of course, the other side of it, which is a little bit of feeling that Big Brother watching kind of, where transparency is great, but at the same time, we know that especially when it comes to centrally sponsored schemes, if you haven't spent your money, then you don't get the next installment. So there is a tension there. How was Odisha able to kind of manage that? Because it's a real tension, and it's been across states. Many states that we've spoken to, there is a desire to keep the PFMS system to some degree separate from the state's own system, because the state expenditures and revenues are, of course, much larger and cover many more schemes and programs as well.
Yeah, thank you for that question. To start with, let me first mention that the states in the country, there are 29 states, and they are at different levels of automation so far as public financial management system is concerned. So at times, even Government of India is in a constraint to actually, because Government of India has to adopt a system which is uniform across the states. So there is a constraint, because some of the states, they are much advanced so far as PFM practices are concerned, PFM expenditure management and fund transfer mechanism and data flow and all those aspects. And even few of the states, they even don't have a integrated financial management system so far. So one of the examples I would like to give is this introduction of SNA, single nodal agency or single nodal account. This is introduced during the current year to actually have a kind of bifurcation of central share of the central sponsored schemes and state share of the central sponsored scheme, and also to monitor the end use of the fund. But it is actually implemented across the states. So for all states, it is being implemented. But let me mention one thing. For Odisha, there is no need for a SNA because our IFMS is robust enough to actually provide each and every information on the end use of the expenditure from the IFMS system itself. So this SNA actually, what it does, it takes away a lot of money and forces the government to park it outside the consolidated fund of the state. So the money float is kept outside the state, and that involves actually central share as well as state share. So this is one example where though a better thing can be done, but Government of India at times is constant to adopt one system which is to be actually made applicable to all states, because they have to take it off a uniform system for all states. So this is one area where we also differ from what Government of India is doing. But we have to again go along. All the states have to move along with the union government. So that is one aspect. But there is another question in the chat box. Can it be possible in Odisha that all schemes, centrally sponsored, state sponsored, can route to the district through district treasury into all districts of Odisha, which can increase transparency? Let me mention that it is already there, because in our integrated financial management system, all the DDOs, all the districts, all the treasuries are integrated, and actually the fund is not flowing to any level till it is paid to the end user. For example, it is a kind of hierarchy: the department, then the controlling officer, then the drawing and disbursing officer. And from the department level, money is actually allotted to the next level. Then from the controlling officer, it is allotted to the drawing and disbursing officer. And when the ultimate bill is presented for end use of the money, like transfer to beneficiaries, suppose in case of DBTs, or maybe if a supplier provides something and payment is made to the contractor, when money goes out of the treasury, it goes directly to the beneficiary account. So there is no float at any level, and visibility is available from the top till bottom, and the report can be generated at any level. So from this system, we have been providing the required information to the PFMS system. So for state like Odisha, which is relatively advanced so far as IFMS implementation is concerned, probably the SNA actually creates a problem for us. Again, we have to move to a system and that requires a lot of changes in our IFMS system, which don't require to be changed. So, so these kind of things will happen. But again, because it is a federal system, we have to move together. So we have to adopt whatever is good for all states. So even if we have to do some changes in our system, we have to move together with Government of India.
Thank you so much, sir. You also answered Nilachal's question of Odisha, why Odisha was not initially keen on the SNA. So thank you for taking the questions from the box, and sorry for putting you on the spot immediately, asking a difficult question. Dr. Bonu, I think everyone's very interested in the index that you spoke about, the data governance quality index. And as a country, we have tried outcome-based budgeting previously. There used to be that, but then it didn't do as well initially, at least, and I'm so glad to hear that it's been revived. I guess what are your hopes from this system? And I know you did touch upon it. Given that we've gone through this process a few times, and given all the challenges that you also outlaid, how do you think that it would bring back, in some ways, the efficiency of the budget process? So would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then there was a question in the chat box as well, that I'm just trying to pull out for you, which is, I think, how essential is the outcome output budgeting exercise, similar to me, by Government of India to achieve the PFMS objectives, especially when it comes to fund flows and management? I would bring it a little bit broader than that, saying not just fund flows and management, but to actually achieve the welfare outcomes that we've set out for ourselves and track them as well.
Thanks, Avani. First, initially, I'll touch upon where we stand in terms of our journey towards building stronger accountability around outcomes, and then probably highlight or stress on the unfinished agenda. So I think in the past, the accountability or the monitoring was largely around inputs, and to some extent around outputs achievement. Clearly, when the schemes are approved, the schemes are approved to achieve some particular objective, which are the outcomes, which are otherwise the outcomes. But many times the scheme objectives are defined in a sort of a vague manner. And when the scheme is approved by Department of Expenditure, there's no clear commitment around the type of outcomes that we are going to achieve in a scheme period, divided again into annual achievements. So the first important task is to define what are the outcomes that the government is going to get for amount of money that Department of Expenditure or Ministry of Finance allocates to various ministries and departments. So there, I think it's very, very important for the proponent ministry and department to clearly articulate the outcomes that they are going to achieve with the budget that is being provided. And then clearly tell what are the data sources through which they are going to track these outputs or outcomes, and what type of delta they are going to show over a period of time. So these are the fundamental things if you really want to track outcomes. So and in case of India, most of the outcomes have to be tracked through investments that we make, which are mostly central sector and centrally sponsored schemes. Of course, our policies, rules, regulations also lead to desired outcomes, where again, I think we need to sophisticate the art of measuring the outcomes for policies and regulations that we have, and also the rules and laws and others through which the government wants to achieve the desired outcomes. I'll limit my discussion to schemes part. I think there's a problem, I think, in better articulation of the outcomes, and then defining them, and also putting data architecture to measure those outcomes on a regular basis. And then only you can build accountability around outcomes. I think we have problems at all levels. Recently, Department of Expenditure had come up with a output outcome measurement program framework that's now compulsory for all EFCs and SFCs, where inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes have to be very, very clearly defined. They're not only defined, but also the indicators have to be clearly stated, and also the data sources as well as risks and assumptions have to be stated. It's a summary, two-page summary for each of the EFCs, SFC. I think that's the starting point, quality at entry. Then once you have these approvals, I think measuring them and tracking them and building some sort of accountability around their achievement. For now, we have a dashboard. Definitely, there are issues around defining outcomes. Many times, because we don't have data architecture, we look at higher outputs as outcomes. So that's a different challenging area, but at least there's an effort that is being made to go in that particular direction. And then we have this annual review meetings at the honorable vice chairman level and member level, where the outcomes achievement are discussed with the concerned line ministries and so forth. So that's one part. So there, in this part itself, as I said, I think steps have been made to make sure that the EFCs and SFCs, the proponent ministries and departments clearly articulate their outputs and outcomes, and so some sort of a ex ante commitment to what needs to be done is documented. Then through output outcome monitoring framework, which is presented along with the budget, states what is going to happen with the money that is being spent. And there is this annual review meetings where detailed discussions take place. Where I think our journey now has to move forward as we use big data and other data sources is to align close to 600 schemes where we are monitoring output and outcomes with the national development priorities that we want to achieve, or the SDGs, and with the SDGs. Then it becomes even more complicated when state governments also are investing huge amount of development funds. Then it's not just the government's development funds that lead to achievement of development outcomes, because the private households also are investing in some of these outcomes. The private sector is also contributing, and there are many other tools with the government to achieve the same outcomes, as I mentioned, communications, regulation, laws. So it's a very, very complex input output world, but the outcomes at the highest level are very clear. What is the growth rate? How many jobs, high quality jobs you are creating? So but again, there I think we need to have a data architecture which will help us to monitor these outcomes on a much more regular basis. Right now, the district level representative data sets are only through NFHS, which comes in once in 5 years, and that too after 1.5 years of survey that's being done. And with the type of rich data technology that we have, we can turn around survey data into insights within 4 or 5 months' time. You know? So I think we are in that direction, and then with more by linking the financial flows with the physical outcome achievement, and trying to figure out what would be the best ways to achieve the same outcomes with different intervention, combination of different interventions. I think we would start looking at a much more sophisticated way of budget allocations. Still, there's a long way to go, but I think we as a nation really need to think through. And the good thing is that we have, through this data revolution that is taking place, there's huge amount of data that is being accumulated, especially in the private sector, which is of immense public policy use. You know, the transactional data, the expenditure data that is happening across, which is to great extent digitized. Those conventional, non-conventional data sources need to be brought in. Then the data government should do a better job of improving its administrative data and strengthen and of course improve the survey data for outcomes. And once you start linking all these data sets, I think we'll start having much deeper and much more real-time good insights to take better decisions. Probably I'll stop here. Thanks, Ravani.
Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing accountability also into the conversation, because that's often missed out in the conversation. Speaking of accountability, I think I guess two questions. One to Mr. Rath as well. Odisha, of course, is one of the has fairly advanced systems, and I know a lot of your treasury data is also available online. We did analyze it as well. I think one of the questions that came from the audience is just to increase accountability. Would it make sense for all the everything to be reflected very clearly? So in districts, so to flow through district treasuries, we try to do this estimation of trying to look at DDO-wise information just to be able to get, there's no such thing as a district budget, but the district becomes such an important implementing arm. So how do you get clear district-wise information? And that's something that even Niti has been doing, of trying to find, how do you disaggregate information, at least at the level of important implementation and decision-making. So would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then, of course, there are a few questions for you. I'm trying to pull them up as well. I think one question was in the Q&A box as well, asking about your fiscal strategy report that you had produced last year, which was a great initiative in terms of bringing reforms. So Nilachal asks, do you agree that the time has come to follow a multi-year budgeting process, and something that I think we, as well as Nilachal's organization, we've been arguing for it, because when you're rushed, when you have a 1-year planning cycle, you're constantly, before you even utilize the funds, you're having to show report on it, and then so it's often done with incomplete information, and we know that some things do take longer than a year to build. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, first part is regarding district level data. Actually, to respond this, I would bring to the notice of this audience that there was a Sundarmurthy committee for accounting reforms. They submitted the report in 2013. It had actually 8 different angles of reflecting the budget data, and when we are in a fairly advanced automated system, it was fairly possible to adopt that, but so far we have not been able to, because it has to be adopted for the entire country, so it is being debated and it is not yet adopted. So had it been adopted, probably geographical area wise data would have been very easier to actually fetch from the PFMS system or IFMS system, whatever we use, because in the existing accounting structure, it is very difficult to actually capture geographical angle to the data. But it's a good suggestion. We'll definitely look into that. How can we actually have a kind of district? Because right now it is again becoming difficult to get earlier what used to happen in pre-DBT mode. Actually, the district level expenditure was incurred at the district level. But right now, bulk of the DBT are actually paid centrally from the central Bhubaneswar or cyber treasury, what we call, which takes into account all digital transactions. So most of the transactions will now be reflected at the cyber treasury level. So again, it is becoming more difficult to capture this district level data, but it's a requirement right now, because district level planning and all those things require district level data. So maybe at all levels we have to think through, and probably that Sundarmurthy committee recommended accounting principle would have actually done a very good thing in identifying those data. So that is one aspect. Maybe at central level as well as state level, we may have to work upon that. And the second aspect is basically a multi-year budgeting. So probably you'll see something this year when we come up with our budget. This fiscal strategy report itself actually makes a kind of states projection and states fiscal policy in multi-year. We brought out it for a Y+2 3 years horizon. Probably this year we will go beyond that. This year's fiscal strategy report will cover a longer horizon, and probably This time also we are planning to have a kind of multi-year perspective to the budget. So maybe this year we can see some changes in our budget outcome in multi-year perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We are out of time, but just maybe one or two last set of questions, if it's okay with both of you, Dr. Bonu and Dr. Mijarat, if that's fine. We will end it quickly. I know I don't want to impinge on your time. I think one question for you, Dr. Bonu. I think Niti Aayog more broadly and DMEO have a very important role, and it's really interesting that we have such a body now in place that kind of can bring together some of these case studies. And this is I'm kind of linking one of my questions with Praveen's question as well, which is different states are at different levels of their PFM journey. How do we document this better? I remember many years ago, actually it was an example from Odisha where Bhadrak, I think, district had tried to do something with Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan at that time. And we were struggling to find like proper documentation of it. And it was a good case study. And I know that Niti does come up with different case studies, but sometimes what is missing is some of these technical depths. How do we get there? And again, can research organizations like ours and others in the audience assist in that process in any way?
Thanks, Avani. I think you have really raised a very, very important area for collaboration. I have been in ETI for 3 years, and what I have realized is the development challenges are immense, and India, and adding to these development challenges is that India is very, very diverse, and different states are at different levels. And even if the lagging states catch up with the advanced states, I think India on aggregate will make so much of progress. So in a very, very capacity constrained environment, when we are looking to accelerate our progress, I think there are a couple of things that we can quickly do. One is to bring in a lot of lateral talent into the government through lateral entry. So that's something that Niti has been doing a lot, very, very effectively. The second is to, instead of doing everything by the government, I think outsourcing some of the services and through very good procurement, and then and also building strong partnerships with academic institutions, think tanks, where it should not be through the regular public procurement, but it should be a little bit trust-based when you are working with knowledge institutions. And the same thing, I think state governments, state planning departments should be doing. But what I have realized is that some of the states are so good. And recently we were looking at how to introduce social registry, where all the where the households can be disaggregated by their income levels, and through direct benefit transfers from a application-based system, you can turn the whole development paradigm into entitlement-based system. So while we were looking at theoretically, we were discussing how to do it. It was pleasantly shocking to know that Karnataka had already implemented end-to-end and done such a good job through their Kutumba scheme. And now we know that there are 10 outstanding people in Karnataka who can come and help in expanding that success story across the country. Now we need to create a platform to document it, and then take those 10 people, give them a platform, because they're so committed. They have been working on it for the last 10 years, and they are willing to spend the rest of their 20 years to expand it across the country. So with very, very limited marginal budget, I think we can do amazing work. It's similar to what you have said, like there are great success stories in PFMS, in parts of implementation of PFMS. How do first we need to identify them, document them in depth, and then take those proponents, the champions who have done that work in that particular state, and give them a platform to spread it across the country. And I think Niti Aayog is really well placed. It has a great brand. When anything under Niti takes place, I think because of the previous Planning Commission track record and Niti's track record, the think tanks, the universities, the state governments, all the stakeholders are willing to come. I think we really need to use that platform to make this happen. And given the challenges, I think Niti has to have strong partnerships with think tanks and universities, and we need to build that large network, because there's so much of talent, knowledge, and abilities that are locked in universities all across. So universities, think tanks, and so how do we bring them into public policy? How do we bring all the research scholars, masters, and engineering students and others into the public policy domain? In doing so, I think it's a win-win situation. You know, you are providing them with real life experiences, and then in doing so, the government also benefits by expanding its capabilities across. So we are grappling with it. We are looking at different procurement methods to quickly onboard think tanks. Recently, we have given around 10 studies, which were largely limited to think tanks and universities. So we want to create that network. We want to create that platform from where success stories in small parts, different parts of India are quickly scaled up. PFMS, we are interested. If someone wants to collaborate with us, we'll be more than happy to collaborate.
Yes, definitely. We'd love to document it, if nothing else. Dr. Bonu, one question for you, one last question for you on, I think, hand in hand with accountability is, of course, transparency. And so Rajesh has a few questions, especially with respect to data transparency. We've all struggled when looking for government data sometimes, which is not always publicly available. I think NHM FMR is definitely a touchy point for us as well. But it is an important aspect of it. I think one of even the PFMS, I remember many years ago, there was going to be a public portal, a citizen side of it as well. Is there anything that is on the cards of strengthening data transparency from a citizen lens? I know that there is a lot more data available now than a few years ago, but I think often the disaggregated data is harder to come by. You have a lot of dashboards and aggregates, but not as much disaggregated data. Anything on the cards around that?
So once again, I think there is, we did this data governance quality index, and transparency and uploading the data onto the websites is also important part of the scoring. The scoring and methodology is on DMO's website. You can go and have a look at it. And what we have found is that different ministries are at different levels. For example, Ministry of Department of Rural Development, Department of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Some of the ministries are doing extremely well in terms of not only collecting high quality data, but also putting large part of it into the public domain. Some of the departments are doing well on the public services side, but when it comes to infrastructure, it's not so good. So looks like it's a sort of a journey, and where there is a lot of accountability or pressure on that particular ministry, probably they are responding much more by opening up their data sets. Rural development is a clear case where I think there's a lot of scrutiny of every scheme by various activists and non-state players. So it intrigues me why some departments are so transparent and why some departments are not. And some of these departments which are still not in that degree of maturity, these are all newly constituted departments. They are not only weak on public disclosure, but they're also weak on many other dimensions too. So it's more of a capacity issue and so forth. So clearly, I think there is a deep desire to put this data in public platform, because that also creates its own cycles of accountability. But I think it also entails that the department should end-to-end digitize and then have automatized API-based linkages to public disclosure. In doing so, you have public disclosure also without creating additional burden internally. And that is what precisely the Data Governance Quality Index is aiming at. And hopefully, there is an action plan and the ministry's departments, and this is all driven by Prime Minister's office. The goal is to achieve 5.0 by December 2022, which also includes greater disclosure of information in public domain. Thanks, Abhi.
Thank you so much, sir. And Mr. Rat, last question for you as well. I think we're really looking forward to the new Odisha budget, and I think Nilachal and I would be very keen to document it. I'm speaking for you, Nilachal, as well, just in terms of the innovations that you've been doing. I think it's an important question. I think COVID, since we're in the middle of our third wave, it has shown how the system can be made more agile. And it's been interesting. Even the union government has lessened some of the controls that existed. And while theoretically you could, taking the example of health, for example, you could spend across the flexi pools. Often that kind of flexibility wasn't actually there in practice. I think we've had to allow for a lot more flexibility, repurposing of expenditure, etc. That has happened. Anything that you could share with us in terms of, will this become the new normal, as it were, or will we, when things go back to normal, we'll go back to a rigid system? So what is Odisha thinking about it and doing about that?
No, this COVID is an extraordinary situation, and to handle COVID, you need to actually do some extraordinary things. So definitely, when everything is uncertain in front of you, you have to be prepared for anything. So that was the objective, and probably the one point disclosure of our Honorable Chief Minister, that every life matters for me. So that was the objective through which actually we had to move around. First, from resource point of view, we had to first ensure that adequate resources are available for COVID management, so that the state can aggressively actually pursue the initiatives required to handle the COVID situation as well as other facilities. So there were a lot of flexibility that was actually extended, especially for the COVID. And there was a high-level committee that was constituted, which was actually given immense power to clear anything. Maybe we have to we have to actually, to save life, we have to break few rules as well. There is no challenge for, no issue for that. Ultimately, it is the people for which the government works. So with that objective, things were done. But in general also, if you look prior to 2005, Odisha was in a dire state. Basically, the finances were in a soup. Over the years, we have been able to actually build up our finances in a prudent manner. Probably we are one of the very few states in the country which has abided by all the FRBM targets right from its enactment. With increasing fiscal space, the kind of delegation which was required to be provided to the implementing agency, it has been substantially enhanced over the years. And many things have been actually put in place which are rule based, and system takes care of all those things. And control from finance department has been substantially reduced. So that is the way we are moving. We have to actually see that better benefit reaches to the people, because ultimately the money is the public money. So that is the objective through which we are moving. A lot of delegation, lot of flexibility has been allowed, and probably moving forward also we are planning to do that at the same time to ensure that it is not misused. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And with that, we will be closing the event, but want to thank you both so much and the audiences. Before we close, I would like to hand over to my co-host Mitul to give some closing remarks. But on my behalf as well, thank you both. And it was a really engaging discussion. And sorry we went overboard. Also, apologies for the technical issues initially. But despite all of this, I think I've at least had a great time, and looking forward to seeing all the new things happening with both the DMEO as well as within the Odisha budget. So thank you both so much. And over to you, Mitul.
Thank you, Avni, and thank you, Dr. Bonu and Dr. Rath, for this very insightful conversation. So your discussion highlighted the need and the possible direction for the next wave of public finance reforms and data governance reforms, particularly in the budget expenditure and outcomes for the citizens. And special thanks for bringing in the difference between public finance reforms and the PFMS, because these two gets always confused in the common parlance. So I just want to pick up on a few points from the conversation. So Dr. brought up a point about 4 trillion rupees, 4.272 lakh crore rupees of unspent balances, which CAG recently cited in the budget of 2019. So of course it reflects on the poor budget formulation, but this is not first time it is happening. So if you look at 2015-16 economic survey, it highlighted 1 lakh crore of float lying in the system for centrally sponsored scheme itself. Recently, Tamil Nadu said 2,000 crore of float is lying, and that was just the tip of the iceberg, and much more data is yet to be revealed from the Tamil Nadu government. We did analysis for one of the scheme of MORD recently. We found 20,000 crores of float, which is lying for that scheme. So this unspent budget and float is a system, a large systemic problem. It's not a problem in itself, but it's just a system. And I'll just sum it up in three key problem statements. So one is the very high friction in expenditure. And Avni, you alluded to it in terms of the cascading manner in which the money flows. So I think we are still, we have moved quite far in terms of our ambitions. In terms of the direction we are taking, but the way we spend money, particularly the public finance, is still the whole school. So now we'll have to look at new ways of spending. The second thing is the low credibility of data. And when the credibility of data is low, that's one of the reasons there is high friction in expenditure. And because of low credibility, there is high administrative burden on officials, on civil servants to make decisions. And the third problem is of the low accountability, or the blunt accountability, I would say, of the frontline officials, because the data is uncredible. So it's very difficult to fix accountability of frontline officials. And these are very high level statements. And we know a lot about these problems, but there is a lot more that we don't know. And to know much more about this, we need to do much more experiments, and we need to do a lot of feedback into the way policy is formulated. And I sincerely hope that with this discussion, this is just a first of the discussion in the series. With the next discussions, we'll be able to talk more about the experimentations, the feedback from the ground, and so on. And I'll just talk about few such experiments and new initiatives that I'm aware of. So, for example, the DMO's initiative on data governance and concurrent evaluation, it's very critical for performance management of the government programs. And I must compliment Dr. Bonu and his team for the outstanding work on the rollout of DGQI. So DGQI, as he was saying, is now mainstream. And I can say it because I have been observing it from the other side. So in almost all my conversations with the departments and ministries, people are taking DGQI seriously. They want to move up the maturity level in DGQI, and it's being monitored at the highest level in respective departments. So if when it's implemented, it will increase the observability, it will increase transparency, and it will increase the credibility of data, which ultimately will increase accountability of issues. Of course, various ministries will be at different levels, and they'll take a time to adopt all these principles. But I'm pretty sure that in the next year or so, we'll have good examples coming from some of the ministries on how DGQI can improve credibility of data and accountability. Now, equally important are the initiatives of Government of Odisha on PFM reforms, because what they are trying to do is they are not just trying to implement the data governance principles, which DMU has outlined, but they're also blending them with the public finance principles. And that's why the digital PFM initiative that they're doing. So these ideas are revolutionary, not just for Odisha, but for India and for the world, because the critical ideas that Odisha government is experimenting with is just-in-time funding and smart payment. And JIT will remove this cascading of budget. So money will move directly from the consolidated fund of Odisha to the beneficiary, whether it's the beneficiary is a contractor, it's a DBT beneficiary, whoever, which is revolutionary. And it will reduce the float, increase accountability, and of course, it cannot happen without a very solid data foundation. And I'm very confident with the kind of leadership and commitment with which the government of Odisha is moving, that they will have a very credible model to demonstrate for India and for the world on the next set of reforms. So ultimately, these reforms will improve the credibility of budget, reduce fiscal deficit, but ultimately this will increase the credibility of state on the promise that it has to the citizens on delivering outcomes. And on critical areas such as health, infrastructure, and so on. So over the next in this year, I'll be keenly watching Dr. Bonu's and Dr. Rath's work, which is very pioneering in its own way. With this, I thank all the panelists and participants, and I look forward to many more sessions in coming months. Back to you, Avni. Thank you.
No, just sorry for the fact that we've gone over, but it's a testimony to how interesting the discussions were. But thank you all so much. We did record the session, and apologies. If anyone has a problem with the recording, please send an email to us and we will try and handle it accordingly. But otherwise, we will be putting out some of this information. We wanted to keep this discussion. We didn't open it up too wide so that we could have more of a discussion amongst people who have been engaging with these issues. But we will be sharing some of the fascinating work that both of you have been doing with a larger audience. So we will be in touch. But thank you all so much, and wishing everyone a safe and happy weekend going forward.